Right, okay then. You next, Dan.
Michael Portillo was in Kent and he went to Rickover Castle. Is it
Oh,
Rickover?
yeah, yeah, on the East Coast. Yeah.
Yeah, Rickover Castle. And they're introducing bisons there. We don't know why, but it's sort of like the castle, picture of the castle, and then there was someone standing there with a bison. So,
Have you been smoking something?
no,
Look,
no.
I've had enough of this. Right, Richard. Anything you want to say, lovely?
No, nothing from me.
Right, Pat, have you got any nice little bits of news? I'm sure Henry will have something to say in a moment. We'll leave Henry to the last.
No, I'm sorry. I'm no news.
Oh, I was dead impressed to be the expert in the Western Mail over these bones at Southern Down, even though it's amazing that there's a whole front page dedicated and one of my bloody photographs without any permission asked from the Western Mail. But yeah, I put the piece around you somewhere. But Pat said, "Oh, your name's on this article. I didn't know you were involved in this thing, right? It's even got one of my photographs in this piece.
Yeah, I thought that's you.
One down there."
Yeah.
And my name's all over this piece, and I had nothing to do with this bone find in at Southern Down. Absolutely, and also it says Mr. Langford is 39. You know,
That was a long time ago.
yeah, but that's probably one of the biggest newspaper articles I've had in ages, and I didn't even phone me. Oh, and also, I've been I've been in the newspapers in North Wales over over the Elysig Pillar as well. So that's been great fun.
Oh, do you know what? It did look really pornographic, that picture of the Elsig pillar.
The Elysig Pillar, yeah, and if you want to get turned on by a phallic symbol, right, it's up to you, right? But we don't talk about that type of filth in our classes, do we, Goff? Right, Henry,
Oh.
anything you want to say?
No, the only thing I've got, there's no real news, but I watched the Pompeii program last night, which I thought was recommended last week, but very interesting.
Yeah, it was. I did. I watched the real one. I watched it as well. Oh, I can't remember what the pertinent point was though.
Yeah, hang on. I think somebody said about this last night that one of the things that they're realizing at Pompeii, there's not as many bodies as they thought they would find. If 30,000 people were trapped in Pompeii, and they've excavated 2/3 of it, the body count is not very high, and and they're also talking about that the numbers of horses and the number of cattle and the number of sheep and the numbers of goats are really low, and they're starting to think that it wasn't as big a disaster on animal and human life as they thought.
Well, yeah, I think the warning signs were there days before with all the earthquakes, and earlier months as well. So I think maybe it's quite probable people did evacuate.
Yes. Yes. Yes, I think that's actually one of the points that's being made with the whole Pompeii situation. Right, so we're not gonna delay any further. It's 7:56. We have actually started about 10 minutes before, but we're gonna get onto the images now. I know Pat needs to go to bed at 31 minutes past 9.
And me.
And me. Yeah, I'll be gone by then.
What 31 minutes past?
Yeah.
Well, 29 probably.
Oh, right. Don't seem too enthusiastic, loves. All right, it's all okay. Just leave it there.
Well, I could have watched
but anyway, one thing we're going to start off with, is this. I would like to say that the monies are now due for next month and the month after. So it's the usual £50 for what is it, May and June. So that's now due. So if you can get that over to me as soon as possible, that will be very grateful, so I can get all the paperwork
I might
sorted
be
out.
40 minutes late and getting that for you.
You might be 4 minutes late.
40.
40 minutes late.
Yeah, like you were today.
Yeah.
Oh, no, hang on. I can't always be perfect. I'm always
We're
doing this,
gonna-
every single thing throughout the year. I'm allowed to be late now and again, right? And I don't get to see films with two sexy women, do I, Goff?
Well, I don't know.
No, we don't know.
What were you trying to say? What are you trying to say? Right, okay. On Saturday, we were doing auditions at the studio for this individual who's going to be doing the live shows with me, and I probably mentioned that. And anyway, afterwards, this chap said he wanted to buy a copy of my book, and he wanted to buy a copy of Romans in South Wales. So we got chatting, and he said, actually, I go out every single day of the week after work metal detecting in the Vale of Glamorgan. And I just thought, right, how do I deal with this? And anyway, he showed me some artifacts, and I was able to identify these Roman artifacts straight away. And I said, obviously, are you reporting these finds? And he said yes. And I said to him, why don't we do like a little photo video of the finds that you find each day? And that's exactly what I'm doing now. So he's metal detecting in Flemingston in the Vale of Glamorgan, which is between Lantwick Major and Cowbridge, as most of us know. And this is one of the photographs. This is actually, I think, from where are we now? Monday. You went out on Monday, and no, this is from Sunday actually. And what you can see is some shrapnel fragments at the top. So these are bits of shrapnel. And obviously some rounds that have been dispensed, and you've got some coins which I think we're looking at 1800s. We've got some nice buttons, and this coin here, and this coin itself is issued in the reign of Henry III, and this was found on the common area of Flemingston, actually, in the Vale of Glamorgan. And this is known as a long cross coin, and this dates to no later than 1272. So what I might do each week is bring you some of these artifacts, and you can just about this is the image of the king, which is actually quite poor on this coin, but it's a coin from Henry III. So what we're going to do now is we're going to crack on to the talk that I'm doing today. So last night I said to everybody, finally, we're going to have a talk about a subject that I don't talk about. And it's a subject that is prehistoric astronomy, and there's a little bit of ritual thrown in. Now, strangely enough, last night, it was quite interesting to see the way I was analysing the material. And it was almost as if I had done a little bit of a U-turn in some of the things that I'd been saying in the past about astronomy and the relationship of these sites. And it does seem to develop. So one thing, obviously, what we can see in front of us is a site that is very, very much linked to astronomy and prehistoric astronomy in Britain, Ireland and Brittany, is the site of Stonehenge.
Hmm.
No, drove past
No,
there
that-
Friday. Told you that.
Yes,
Oh, what's
So-
that stone?
that's known as the heel stone. That used to be
Oh.
directly alongside the road now, that is now covered up.
Oh.
Now, the one big question is, and if we get straight into it, the one big question is, did prehistoric astronomy actually occur in Britain? Is it actually a real phenomenon? Is it something that really did take place?
Hmm.
And the first thing that I answered that was that maybe it did on some sites, maybe on other sites it didn't. And after the analysis of these images, we look at Newgrange, we look at Mice Howe, we look at a site in Brittany, we look at some elements for daylight and sunlight, and we go to the Hebridean island of Lewis, and we look at and we try to explain through just a few images. We don't have many images tonight, and one of the things that I was remarkably struck with is my circumstance today, right? And not today, but that I've got sheep, and you know, we try to plant crops, and we've got crops that we harvest, like crab apples, and you know, we sell quite a lot of crab apples to people. Actually, we made £500 in crab apple sales last year. So, you know, and one of the things I realised was looking at this is that astronomy, sunsets, the moon, the sun, the coming up of the sun, the going down of the sun, you know, the lunar orbit and all these other things, and stars up in the sky. In many ways, none of these decide what I do. In fact, none of them decide what I do. I don't look at weather reports. I decide by what is actually going on in the moment whether to do certain things, right? And then I'm starting to realize that people in the past did the same thing. So say, for example, everybody's waiting for the solstice, and the solstice are 3 days where the sun hovers in the same place for 3 days. You know, it's in the same sort of transept for 3 days. You know, it sort of comes up, and there's the light and the dark is the same. You know, there's no less light and there's no more dark for 3 days around solstice, right? I didn't know it was 3 days. It was 3 days, right? And then suddenly we get less and less light. So we get more and more light leading up to solstice on the 21st of June, and we get less and less, right? And I thought, hang on a minute, that makes no iota. Whether my sheep are going to have lambs at a certain time of the year, it makes no difference when I harvest my crops. Because if there's rain and other things going on, that's nothing to do with the coming up and going down of the sun, right? That's one thing that we realized last night. Anyway, let's get on to the material.
It is to do with the
Now,
moon,
hang on,
though.
Anne. What's that, Anne?
It is to do with the moon, though. Water.
I don't think so.
All right. Sorry.
It's to do with the conditions of everything, right? And one thing that I've been doing over the past, at least the past 6 months, I've been doing videos on TikTok, right? And which is, and I've been discussing how history and archaeology decides the environment and so on. If any of you have watched those videos, and it all links to this prehistoric astronomy and archaeological sites and stuff, right? So the first question is, did they actually do astronomy, right? Did people align some of their burial places and shrines on the rising and setting of the moon and the sun? Now, that might be true with some sites. It might not be true with others. Is there some kind of misinterpretation of how we look at these archaeological sites? In some cases, that's correct. That's a correct assumption. When again, do we? And then, if we think about astronomy, did it exist? And if it did exist, what was it used for? Now, that's a really key question. So if we're not using astronomy for deciding when I plant my crops, or when I harvest my nuts, or when my lambs are born, right? What are we using this for? Were there astronomers? Were there astronomer priests? Scientifically studying the heavens like we do today, or scientifically studying the heavens as we did in the past? What are these alignments for? What is the purpose of all this? Is it for communication with the dead? Is it for communication with the spirits? Now, I don't think we'll get many of these answers, and I don't believe that we'll get many of the solutions. But one thing that we can learn in everything that we've done in regards to prehistory is one thing that we can do is to understand that different people do different things in different areas of Britain at different times with different influences. And that's very interesting that I say that, because on the 21st of 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 June, when you've got the solstice, up north they get an hour more of light than they do at Stonehenge, believe it or not.
Oh.
Now, in 1923, there was a chap by the name of Rear Admiral Boyle Somerville. Now, this guy in 1923 was massive into his understanding of archaeology and astronomy. And he wrote the following: the occurrence of orientation in prehistoric structures has long been noticed, like this site in Brittany. It is not, however, received much in the way of archaeological thought or understanding in 1923, because archaeologists really dismissed the idea that these sites have any bearing on astronomy or alignments in the past. But now archaeologists are recognizing that orientation is an important player in the architecture of some of these sites. Somebody said last night, people always align their doors on the rising of the sun. And I'm just thinking, well, did they? There might be other factors. And there are always other factors when we look at the past. One of the ways that we can actually understand how these sites were aligned, like Mouse Howe, is by getting radiocarbon dates. Because in some ways, the lines for the alignments of these associated with the entrances pointing towards the sun or pointing towards the moon, all these things change. And if they're not exactly aligned today, they may have been aligned in the past. And when, again, what we've got to do, we've got to think about these alignments in the past and not the alignments as they bear today. But there's 2 points with all of this. When we think about the development of Stonehenge, Stonehenge was developed over 2,000 years. And sometimes with the development of stones like Stonehenge that have developed over 2,000 years, things may have been added that are associated with different alignments. As an archaeologist, I can stand at these archaeological sites and say that's not really aligned on the solstice, right? That is, and you're thinking, well, if you think about things in the past, maybe they were aligned. But then again, if nothing's aligned, there might be alignments to do with star arrangements, constellations, and star such as Orion, and such as the Dog Star, all these things. And you stand to think about these sites that actually might be aligned, associated with some of these other phenomena, rather than just the moon or the sun. And one thing that we can say is that when we look at the likes of ancient Egypt, on their cave walls throughout Egypt and elsewhere, they've got star alignments which you can't see today. But when you look up at the sky with modern high spectrum level of telescopes, right, you can actually see these things that they could see back then that you can't see with the naked eye today. Somebody mentioned last night, they said you might be unfair on the ability to see constellations with the naked eye today and stars with the naked eye today, but because we've actually got cloud pollution, maybe you could see them if we didn't have the pollution that we've got in the air, right? Now, when we see all this, when we understand this whole landscape of archaeology and this whole landscape of stars and alignments, right, is a very complex way of looking at things. And one site that we will have a little bit more of look at today is the site of Callanish. And what we did last night, we went onto Google and we looked at a load of images on Google. So discovering and proof of prehistoric astronomy and ritual is something that I have avoided doing as a lecture from day one. This is not a lecture that I wanted to do, right? It's like forcing me to do a lecture on the Celts, right? Which I'm certainly not doing. But then again, I might. But when I do my lectures, if I dismiss things, sometimes I need to dismiss them with counter arguments. And maybe I'm not dismissing as much of this tonight as you might think. Now, by the way, I'm loving this cranberry juice I'm drinking. Prehistoric people looked to the skies for protection. Did they? Did they not? Archaeology has been reluctant to accept anything in the realm that people used to look at, the stars. But we look at the stars. When I was a child, after, when something really terrible happened when I was 8, I actually had a telescope, right? And to try and get my mind to deal with things, right? I used to use this telescope and I used to look at the moon, right? But it was the only thing I could see in the sky, right? But I was just genuinely interested in the moon, 8, 9, and I stopped looking at my telescope after that, right? And it strikes to me that as today, as in the past, people were curious when they looked up at the night sky. The belief that ancient societies in Western Europe laid out sight lines to the moon, the sun, and stars is something that was generally laughed at throughout the 1900s. There was an archaeologist that derided the idea of anything to do with astronomical connections with these sites in 1930. There was a guy by the name of George Engelhardt. In 1930, that's not even 100 years ago, he wrote, "Orientation has no sounder basis in objective fact or logic than had the druidical, draconian, phallic, and other obsolete imagerings." Imagerings, that's a really interesting word. Now, in many ways, what he said is completely correct. But what he's discounting is that they may have something to do with the moon and the sun and the stars. They've certainly got nothing to do with druids. And the reason why they've got nothing to do with the druids, the only mention that we've got on one of the first mentions that we've got of druids in Britain is by Tacitus in relation to Suetonius's, Paulinus's movements on Anglesey, right, in the 60s AD, right? And we don't really know when he mentioned the word druid, whether he was actually talking about the druids of those long cloaks and bit of green stuff in the air, in the hair, right? In other words, what we're saying is these sites were built thousands of years before any druidical imagery anyway. So they were nothing to do with druids, full stop.
No.
However, they are to do with something, right? And we can't deny that. And when we look at the Callanish site, you will see something quite spectacular, and that's where we finish tonight.
Is that in Brittany?
That's in Lewis, in Hebrides. Lovely. Now, in 1740, the antiquarian William Stukeley was the first to recognise a solar alignment. William Stukeley in the 1740s. He said that the intention of the founders at Stonehenge was to set the entrance full northeast, being the point where the sun rises or nearly at the summer solstice, he noted. The or nearly was an unfortunate mistake, caused by his faulty theodolite. 30 years later, Dr. John Smith, this is aligned here on the northeast, this stone, as you look at it. 30 years later, Dr. John Smith, having read Stukely, corrected the error. He said the stone number 1, which is this heel stone, there was 2 of them on the avenue that led into Stonehenge from the northeast. This heel stone at Stonehenge, in the middle of the Grand Avenue to the temple, is the key. At the summer solstice, when the days are longest, he enters the sign Cancer and seems to rise in the same point of the horizon 3 days together. Yes, it hovers for 3 days. Now, I said 2 things last night, and the 2 things that I said was this. Could you imagine trying to get some of these, trying to align things up, right? And you think, right, I have waited all year, yeah, and you stay up all night, and the sun doesn't come up. Is a mist, and there's a thunderstorm, and you've missed it. So you think, right, I'll wait till the next day, and it's still pelting down with rain. So you've got to think of any alignments under the year, right? People look at these sites and they think it's all hunky dory. I've been to Stonehenge at night, right? I didn't see the sun rising because there was too much wacky backy being smoked, right? And I left, and it was just like, you know, and it was like misty and foggy that day, and you really couldn't see the sun aligning. I also went to Woodhenge several times, and it would be the same thing, that it would be misty and foggy and sort of overcast, and you wouldn't see anything, right? And it starts to make you think that the same frustrations that we get today would have been the same frustration they got in the past. Or are they the same frustrations in the past? Because we might be misinterpreting what's going on with these sites altogether. So when we enthusiastically and over-enthusiastically examine these sites throughout the 1800s, examining prehistoric sites for sightlines, and slipshod claims for precision encouraged by skepticism among archaeologists. What archaeologists were starting to say in the 1900s, Gordon Child, for example, who was an eminent prehistoric archaeologist, he was the one of the excavation at Skara Brae. In the 1930s, 1940s, he said about these sort of people saying that these sites are associated with alignments and so on. He said it is fantastic to imagine that the ill-clad inhabitants of these boreal isles should shiver night long in rain and gale, peering through the driving mist to note eclipses and planetary movements in our oft-veiled skies. Well, okay. Now, we presume that people ran around completely stark naked in the past. If they did, human civilization wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes in Britain. They didn't run around stark naked. I run around the Ring of Brodgar completely stark naked, and I was bloody cold after it, right? And that was a run around the Ring of Brodgar completely stark naked, right? And that was very, very cold, and that was in the summer, right? And I'm thinking, obviously temperatures ain't much colder today than they were then back then, and you're thinking, well, these people weren't stupid, and they obviously used these sites for purposes that we might have an idea at, and we might not have any idea at all. But it's worth having a look. It's worth trying to get some kind of understanding for what's going on with these sites. But what we start to see is the unwillingness or inability to understand the intricate cycles of the moon movements. Is something that needs to be underlined by what may have been going on at these sites. They certainly weren't using the likes of Newgrange in Ireland for human sacrifice. Then again, they may have. They weren't using Stonehenge for human sacrifice. Then again, they may have. But what we've got to think of is most of the evidence is that these sites would have had an important raison d'etre to understand the minds of these people many thousands of years ago. Now, that there, it's not a brilliant image, but there's the entrance, and above there you've got another little box, right? And people have been interested by this little box above the main entrance to Newgrange, and we're talking about that little box there. That's the entrance down below, and that's a nice bit of carving there. But this is the box that we're interested in now, right? This is what we're going to explain a little bit about, right? So it's said that when we look at Newgrange, this is known as the roof box over the entrance to the passage in Eastern Ireland. And that box itself is so aligned that the rays of the mid-winter sunrise illuminates the burial chamber. And there are other solar orientations associated with the likes of Maes Howe, which is the next image. And we're thinking that this is all good and true, but there's one problem. Some sites, the stones have been realigned and they've been altered. So this gives us a dichotomy. Is the evidence that we're seeing accurate, or is the evidence that we're seeing not accurate by the way we've reconstructed the site? Now, when you think about Wayland Smithy, for example, the cow can jump over the moon at Wayland Smithy, but the problem is with Wayland Smithy is that the stones have been realigned, and again, what we've crushingly got is the problem of reconstructing these sites, like Newgrange, in that do the reconstructions accurately record past events and past meanings for these very important, enigmatic, powerful sites and timelines of the prehistoric world within the British Isles. Now, I actually made a mistake last night and I actually admitted it, right? I got a bit excited and I said, that entranceway there is actually this.
No, it's not.
But actually, Anne, right? I've made a little mistake now because Pat actually went down this chamber, this corridor with me, right?
Yeah.
Pat, does that look familiar?
A little.
But that's in Brittany, in France, right? Yeah, I got caught out by that. I got caught out by that myself, and I'm quite excited that Pat said that because as Pat's going out, the guide in there, she says, I want a word with you, and we had a chat, and we talked about echoes and all sorts of things in there, while the rest of them were outside shivering in the freezing cold, with one person wearing carrier bags over his shoes. But that wasn't me. But Pat knows what I'm talking about. But the point is, I actually got a bit excited by this mistake because I thought that's in Brittany, but it's exactly the same sort of length as the entranceway that you can actually crawl into when you go to the burial chamber at Maes Howe. But this is on bloody Orkney, and this is in Brittany, right? I got quite excited by that. This is actually the site of Morbehan, which is Gravenus in Brittany, right? And there's a burial chamber which is very similar to, it's a lot more stone, but very similar to one in Orkney, hundreds and hundreds of miles away. Now, this site itself has been finally restored, but the entrance, this passageway, hasn't been restored to affect the actual gravity of the meaning of this site. Now, this site contains not one but two alignments. One alignment of passageway to the sun and one alignment of passageway to the moon. Its long passage, an art gallery of lavishly decorated pillars, faces southeast towards the most southerly moonrise. So the passageway, when the passageway leads in a southeast direction towards the southerly moonrise, there is more. From the south side of the end chamber to the north side of the entrance is a second sight line, is directed on the midwinter sunrise. And you start to think that this is not just accidental, right? This can't just be accidental, right? And I've got somebody with me who's actually on YouTube, who actually took part in last night's lecture, called Carly from the States, and And one of the things that Carly was saying things in the States last night, and it was really good, and obviously some of the things that we're doing now are from last night. But when you think about this architectural signpost, this sort of these alignments, which have some intersecting meaning with the sun and the moon, is just not just accidental. Right. So if I just rewind a little bit, from some of my lectures, and what we've done with lots of the lectures to do with prehistory, what we've done is we focused on the archaeology and the finds. We haven't really focused on alignments and sight lines and things to do with the cosmos and all these things that go bump in the night, because we simply didn't have time. We don't have time to go through it all tonight, but the Gavrinis site, Garv, Gavr, in Siarad Cymraeg, Gafr means goat. And as the Brittany language is very similar to Welsh and Cornish, Innis, Inis, which is roughly translated as Ynys, as in Ynys Môn, which this is the island of goats, right? So this mound is associated with the spit of land in Brittany. And you could say, in a moment, if you so wish, is this a scientific observatory for astronomer priests? Or are these alignments nothing to do with astronomy? They're simply to do with the process of life and death.
Yeah.
You think about the sun entering a chamber, giving life, and the moonrise giving a sense of the afterlife and the word death. And I believe, and I'm going to say it now, I believe the process of life and death and where we go is very important to our ancestors, right? More so than the actual burial itself. And I've said this before. Human remains were carried around by people in the Neolithic period, and maybe they were doing the same thing in the Bronze Age and Iron Age at some sites. It simply didn't end. And you know what? I've got a locket of several of my children. I keep their teeth, some of them, and I've still got it all. And my little girl that I haven't seen since 2012, I've actually got a locket of her hair, and I carry it around with me. Right, it's almost as if I'm mourning her passing. Right, but they did that in the Victorian period.
Yeah.
It's when we think about what we do, unfortunately, we look at the past and we think, oh my God, they were carrying bones around with them, and they were carrying skulls around with them, and they're carrying teeth around with them. That's nothing. That's no difference than what I'm doing, and it's no different than what people were doing in the Victorian period, right? So if we shield ourselves from the reality, we shield ourselves from the understanding and the meaning of these sites and getting deeper and deeper, right? The one thing, if we think about this mound at Mice Howe, and we think about the earth there, the earth itself is as important as the chamber, because if you're using the chamber as a temple at Mice Howe, which is something that we've discussed, and at times we may have been putting human remains in there as an offshoot, a little bit like a church. Why is there a mound of earth around it? Why are these built on mounds of earth platforms? Why do you get the huge mounds of earth banks? What's Silbury Hill about? What's the Marlborough Mound about? What are these rings of earth to do with at Durrington? And you start to think that they're to do with our ancestors. That's to do with where our ancestors are living and going and believing. I I've got we've got I'm going to say it now. We've got about 70 animals buried here. We've got a cemetery. We've got 70 odd animals buried here, from animals that I picked up on the road as I've been driving here, animals that have passed away, sheep, ducks, turkeys, peregrine falcons, badgers, beavers, all sorts of things buried here, right? And they've got trees there, and it's like a sacred space. It's like that nothing else is going to happen there, right? And I feel that, and you start to get the feeling that people felt that as well. Where we revere our cemeteries today still. We revere our places of the dead in Germany, in France, Flanders Fields, and all the rest of it. Earth and minds and the sense of passing is to some of us as important today as it was to them in the past. And to add in there the yearly movements in these heavenly bodies, having that explanation makes perfect sense to me. The point to be made is that most 8-year-old children in Britain would know that sun rises in the east and sets in the west. 5,000 years ago, similar children would have known this was wrong. On countless long summer days, they saw the sun rise at the northeast and set at the northwest. They knew that 3 moons later, the slowing, shifting sun would rise at the east, and that by midwinter, it would have risen far down the chilled skyline at the southeast, only to set a few hours later on the southwest. And when you start to think about that, you start to think that things have altered over time. There's been a wobble, there's been a change, that there's been there's been a seeming evolution of these alignments, and the prehistoric ilk and the prehistoric chill has obviously given light to a new alignment depending on where you are across these wonderful lands of ours. The mechanics of the solar and lunar cycles are very important today if you're a sailor. Gough out on his boat, I'm sure he would have been very aware of the cycles of the moon and the cycles of the rising sun and all the rest of it, and the pole star. But all of these things were very important to people in the past. If societies, and some did, align their ritual monuments on these events, this was for various different reasons. Orientating a chambered tomb or a stone row or something on an alignment is a question that may never fully be answered, and why and wherefore all the stellar alignments given the evidence is quite slight, but we can at least hope to understand something from the bare information that we can understand about this very depth and very rich imposed landscape. In the Neolithic and Bronze Age, our ancestors have noticed how the sun or moon moved day by day along the horizon. And a different horizon it was, may I add. When last night, I had a break and I went outside, and Michelle was looking at the rising moon, and it was coming up above some trees in the distance, and it looked really interesting. It looked really beautiful. And I thought, oh God, I got to go in now. Right. Anyway, there's a point to be made here. The skyline in the past would have been very different. It may have been full of trees, and they may have seen the alignment of the moon at a different point than the alignment of the moon that we see today, because of the trees that dominated parts of the landscape that don't dominate the parts of the landscape today. So their interpretation, and so when you think about it, just think about it, right? You think of your fist, right? And you squeeze and you tighten your fist and you think, right, if I look at my fist and I put my other hand behind it as I'm doing now, you can only see certain things above that hand. But when you remove that hand, you see more. Wouldn't that have affected alignments in the past with things that are no longer in the way, and that affecting our interpretation in this modern day and age of these archaeological sites? We can't always know the skyline of our inherent ancestors' understanding. Our forefathers had a different law and a different look on that landscape, and things may have been simple or more complicated than we can understand today. Prehistoric art in Britain or Ireland was rarely representational. We have few unambiguous pictures or carvings to tell us whether people believed that the earth went round the sun or the sun around the earth, whether the sun was drawn by oxen, was on the back of a great big tortoise, or it floated in a heavenly sea, or a god who awakened to peer down on earth each day, or a god who urinated on the planet and that represented the rain. We can only think about what our ancestors thought about what was going on around him or her, but it may have been all of those things at the same time. Do you know, this may sound a bit nutty, right? I was talking to somebody very knowledgeable the other day. You can ask him the name of a plant and he will give the Latin practically every time. You can ask him when and when not to plant a tree and what to do with this soil and that soil. And he said to me, actually, there might be something in this flat earth theory. And I said, you what? And he said, think about it. And I said, I'm not thinking about this. I've spoken to people about this and it's nonsense. And he said, but when you think about horizons and the way the earth curves and it doesn't curve and all these different things, it's a conversation we're having now. And obviously scientifically I've been up in a plane and I do believe that the earth is round, right? But these people didn't have that luxury. But did they even think the earth was round at all? Did they even think that the earth was flat at all? Did they even have an idea? Did they even want? The thing is, right, the concept, this is a point. The concept that there's something underneath this planet, right, is something that we think about today. It's an Orson Welles type of thing, you know, Jules Verne. You know, you could think about journeys to the center of the earth, right? But did they actually even want to think like that in the past? Did they need to?
No.
Did their minds even want to explore that? Would they have even explored in the past that when somebody's ill, you know, there's a way of saving them? Did they even think that if you did they even think that actually, you know, there's all these different things, how things worked in the past, and maybe they definitely didn't think the same way as us, in other words.
Could I
So
just
sometimes, hang on, sometimes our ancestors saw that the sun never rose farther at the skyline than the northeast, and that when it was there, the daylight lasted longer, the weather was warmer, and the trees were in leaf. For 3 or 4 days, the sun appeared at the same spot. It's standstill or solstice, and then day after day it rose a little southwards until after 6 darkening months it reached its extreme winter solstice position at the southeast. Today's 21st of December, where the sun is actually acting in the same way for 3 or 4 days. And
I was just thinking of you know, the different parts of the world nearer the equator that Felix, my son-in-law, said that they don't turn the clocks back.
because they don't need to.
They don't need to. And no, well, it's not. It's just that, yeah, the sun goes down exactly the same time every day. Morning, like winter, summer, spring, it always goes down at 7 o'clock in the evening. And
That would be
it must come up at a relatively the same time every morning as well.
That would be that's again, Anne. You've actually just said something really, really valuable, right? What conceptually we've got one way of looking at things,
Yeah,
and conceptually they've got another way of looking at things.
yeah.
And that and therefore, Anne, this is actually, Anne, you've actually just said something really, really valuable, right? Now, okay, right. So we have our alignments in this country, right? In Spain, they have their alignments in their country, and in other parts of the world, they have their alignments, right? But they're what we're saying there, and you've actually made a good point, and it makes
The
perfect sense.
Caribbean.
Like,
This person lived in the Caribbean, so
yes, yeah,
it wasn't
yeah, no,
Spain.
yeah,
It was,
I know.
no.
Go with what I'm saying. So in
Yeah.
some
So
parts,
yeah,
so if they're saying that their sites in their countries, right, are aligned on the sun and the moon, right, and really not much happens, why are they doing it?
yeah.
So are we doing it for the same reason, or is there another reason why we're doing it? And that's a very valuable point you've just made there, and a very valuable point. Back to the
I think it's not as. I think it's more. It's making every area more important to themselves. It's not. We're not comparing. We can't. That's what we can't do. We couldn't
compare.
compare.
We can't.
In those
Yeah.
days, they couldn't compare. So they only.
But archaeologists, but this is the point, and archaeologists say that they did, and I would disagree with that. I go with what you would say, that we can't really compare one for another, because this is another point we're going to crack on. Man would soon associate the mid-summer solstice with light and warmth, and the southeast solstice with darkness and cold. And the sun provided them with a helpful calendar to mark the seasons, despite the disadvantage that one could not look at it directly. So I don't agree with that. And the reason why I don't agree with that is that seasonally things change throughout time, all the time. When I remember doing something really recently about this in the 1980s and in the 1990s. No, start again. In the 1980s, I used to go. Somebody made a really valuable point online now, which I'm going to make not in a moment. In the 1980s, I used to go to the RAF St. Athan Air Show, right? And it used to be the best weather ever throughout the 1980s, and it used to be the air show at the same time of year every year, right? And I've looked this up. I'm sure it was sometime in June, but I haven't been able to get the date sorted. But it was the same time of year every single year, right? And then when the 1990s started coming, it started raining, right? And at that same point, every single year from then onwards, it rained at the time of the RAF air show, right? And I think after that they started cancelling it. At one point, the air show that they were having ended, right? And I think it was to do with the weather, right? And I'm starting to think that that's a really fitting point. If you're basing, so say for example, I would really love to know the exact date, but we're gonna have to surmise. So say for example the date was the 30th of June, right? Every single year, right? An ancient man knew that the 30th of June was like 10 days after the solstice, right? 9 days, 10 days, right? And they thought, right, this is when we're going to harvest our crops, right? So they thought, right, we're going to harvest our crops 10 days after solstice, right? And for year in, year out, it was always sunny on that day. And then suddenly, 10 days after solstice, the following year, it rained. And they can't harvest their crop. It's too late, right? And the following year, it's too late. They can't harvest their crop. So they've lost the whole crop, right? What I'm trying to say is that our ancient ancestors weren't stupid. And I don't believe that they used the solstice and the dates and the timings and all these things as a clock. They used their minds. They understood the landscape by the way they were examining the landscape, not reliant upon alignments of the sun or the moon. And that is a very valuable point. So what was all of this about? We're going to, I want us to have a break in a moment, right? And not going to have any questions, right? We're just going to go off for like 10 minutes, right? We're not going to have any questions. We're going to leave all the questions to the end, so we can capture a little bit of time tonight. We're not going to have a long break. It will be no more than 10 minutes, okay? But I'm just going to do. I'm just going to float an image in front of us, right? And we'll oh, this one here. And we'll come back to this. Although few people were aware of it, the solstice positions of the sun differed according to the latitudes, and that is something that we've mentioned. In northern Britain, the winter days were shorter and summer days longer than in the south. At Stonehenge, daylight on Midsummer's Day lasted some 16.5 hours, but at the Stone Row of Ballarocroy, in Scotland, 300 miles to the north, there was an extra hour of hour of light because the sun rose and set nearer to the north in that latitude. So in other words, that locality in Scotland had 17.5 hours of sunlight. And if you go to Shetland, it's going to be 18.5 hours of sunlight, right? So what we're going to do now, we're not going to have any questions. We're going to keep the questions until the end. We're going to have a 10-minute break. So everybody get your kettles on, right? And I'm not going to answer anything now. I'm just gonna let off some steam, right? And we're going to be back in 10 minutes, right? So guys, talk amongst yourselves.
Oh,
Put the kettle on as well. I'm going to put mine on.
well, we have got to go to the kitchen to put the kettle on.
Yeah, we gotta go.
I'm going to go to the loo. Oh, right. Sorry about telling everybody that. Oh, I'll wash that.
And make sure you use some tissue. Oh God, she's funny, isn't she? Flipping heck. I'm gonna put a jumper on. Is it me or is it getting cold? Where's my bloody glasses? Glasses. Not glasses. Glasses. Glasses.
Hello, is he back then?
No, I don't know.
Hello. I just phoned Gander and
Bill,
Bill. And
What?
who's that?
Well,
I'm here.
I'm talking to Pat.
Yes,
right. Okay.
I ju-
Okay. Let's crack on.
who'd you call?
Right,
Who'd you call?
Bill?
Gander and Bill.
Ghostbusters.
They can't make Friday, so we can either make
Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters!
Who are you going to call?
Ghostbusters! Do 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 do
I
do
can't make Friday.
Sorry.
I'll message you, Pat.
Okay.
Right, okay, let's crack on. Right. Atmosphere, latitude, excellent points. Traveling astronomers. That's one point that Carly made online about traveling traveling astronomers. People. It's like when we talk about you know the people with this beaker technology, and we talk about copper miners, and we talk about trade, and we talk about axe factories, and all these different things. You may have had people moving around with different ideas about what things mean in the sky. In a way, I sort of compared it with modern day astrologers. But anyway, let's just get back to this, and what we need to do is hopefully have enough. Hopefully, we've managed to bank a little bit of time this evening with me being late, so by not having any questions and a shorter break. So hopefully, anyway, so this is a nice little chart. And when I read through this last night, I was probably a little bit hasty in its interpretation. The one point is that if you think of this as of a 360-degree circle, right? And you think of the rise of the sun at 51 degrees, right? And then it sets, you go all the way around and it sets at 309 degrees, and that's at Land's End. And then we forget about the equinoxes in the middle, and we then look at mid-winter sunrise and sunset. So the sunrise and sunset is actually closer in where it's occurring than where it had occurred before in midsummer on the 21st of June. So in the midwinter, and obviously you get less light associated with Land's End. And it's more acute when you look at the Shetlands, for example. So where it's setting on the compass is a greater distance than where it's rising and setting in the Shetlands. And likewise, when you look at mid-winter, where there's going to be a lot less light in the winter months, in the likes of Shetland. Now, if we go to the other chart, this makes things a little bit easier to understand. And if we make this statement, halfway up Britain, at the latitude of 55 degrees, the sun's rising and settings change greatly from summer to winter, as we see when we look at table 2. So if we look at this second table, if we look, for example, we look sort of towards Scotland, right? And we think about 45 degrees, yeah, that's 17 and a quarter hours of daylight in that time, the 21st of June. And that is really, really interesting when we're looking at that. And if you remember, Stonehenge has 16 and a half hours. Obviously, further north, there's more light in the summer months. And I know I'm sounding very, very obvious. The further south you go, there's more light in the winter, right? And the further north you go, there's less light in the winter, right? And our ancestors would have known this. And also, the point to be made is that people would have had different attitudes to the light and the dark in different places in Great Britain. Now, I didn't talk about this last night, and one thing that hits at me straight away was that the lives of people, for example, in Orkney and Shetland, in the summer months, with the amount of extra time they had to do things over people in the south, is a difference of 1 or 2 hours of life to do things in the light in the summer months. But equally in the winter months, just think you've got 5 hours of light in the winter. It must have been quite catastrophic. If you lived somewhere like Orkney or Shetland, and you might actually have places in the farthest north of Shetland where you had between 5 and 5.5 hours of light, or even less. And what I'm trying to express is that one thing that we do as archaeologists is this. We say, right, they did this and they did that, and they farmed and they kept things. And one thing we don't really talk about is the light. We don't really put this concept in. Can you imagine in the winter months, the people in these remotest places in Scotland would have needed a massive stockpile of material to burn in the winter months, indoors, to keep them warm and to keep them active. And that is a concept that we don't talk about. It's almost as if, life in the past was hard, but we don't actually talk about how hard it was. In the summer months, they were able to do everything. In the winter months, they weren't. And I think that that's something that we need to think about when we look at history and archaeology, when we associate this with light and darkness, summer and winter. Now, one thing I didn't do last night, I didn't spend much time on this chart at all. In fact, I basically said, look at the complexities of how we look at this lunar cycle every year. This is a lunar cycle. We in a year we have 8.6 lunar cycles, right? So the moon has just over 18 cycles a year, right? And this is obviously ever changing, ever evolving. And this was something extremely complex that we didn't discuss last night, and we're not going to do it tonight either. I'm not a physicist. I'm an archaeologist. I'm an actor. I can't. It would take me an hour to teach this and get around this, and we're not going to do this. But in what I've just said, however, the point is that our ancestors may have had an easier solution than me struggling to try and dictate what we're seeing. So what we're going to do, I jumped directly and I said, let's go on to the next thing, right? And we went on to this. And the problems and some answers involving a site on the Isle of Lewis, which is out in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. And have I got a map here? I don't think I have. One thing I did last night was I went to Google, right, and I basically said, right, look at this, and we had a good old look at some of the stuff on Google, and that's what we're going to do tonight. However, let's look at this. So if you think of the north of Scotland and you think of the Outer Hebrides, those islands off the west coast of Scotland. Now, Callanish, the famous circle at Callanish. Now, Pat. Oh, I've done it again, haven't I? Bloody hell! I was going to say to Pat. Oh, actually, I'm going to do it, Pat. Right, Pat.
Yes.
You've been here with me, right?
Oh.
What does? No. That again. You haven't been here with me, but what? But what does this look similar to where you have been with me? Just this image. Can you get? Go on.
Stones.
The ring of stains, very similar, but if you go a bit further up, where are we going? It begins with a B. Okay, the ring of Brodgar. Yeah.
Yes, that's the one. That's the one. Yes.
So that's what you were thinking of when I showed Pete was there last night, and I was going to say, Pete, remember this place? We've been there. Oh yeah, the ring of Brodgar. No, it's not. It's actually on the Isle of Lewis, right? The Outer Hebrides. This is the site. This is the circle of Callanish, right? And it looks exactly from where we're standing. If I superimposed an image of the ring of Brodgar, it would look very similar, right? And that is a point. Lots of these sites look very similar, but their interpretation is going to be very, very different. Carly says online, navigation for points of international traders. So these things are all over the place. What do they actually mean? They could mean anything. And obviously, Carly's saying photosynthesis is complex, and that is a good point. So me saying that these stone circles are so much not to do with planting of crops, they are to do with something else. Now, it is interesting to see how the belief that prehistoric people were scientists and astronomers developed. Now, what is a scientist? What is an astronomer? The story of Callanish by the western coast of Lewis shows how this came about. Over the centuries, this marvelous stone circle, which is there, and what we're going to do, what we did last night, and which I maybe should have prepared it and sort of chucked it in, but I didn't, because I thought I would just go on Google. So that's where we're going to go now. So we're going to go off. And there's Baldric. We love our Baldric, don't we? You saw Baldric in the flesh today as well, so that's good. And actually, Anne, you know, when we were showing you the animals earlier on, I had actually planned that. And I know I was late tonight, but I thought, right, okay, I would plan to do that. So, yeah. So, okay, if you type in Callanish, hang on any computer, and you go Callanish stones, there we go, and you look at the images. And one thing that strikes us is these alignments here, and that's going to be really, this image here is going to be very important for us in a few moments, right? So it's got all these different alignments. And what I did, I basically jumped into this one straight away last night. And I said, look at that from above. Yes, it does look a bit like a crucifix. It really, really does. A crucifix in reverse. Because if you look at, for example, this, that is north is the other end of the crucifix. And what you can clearly see here is that the alignments are slightly weird because the one at the top, the alignment at the top, I'll talk about all this in a moment. The alignment at the top goes off in a northeasterly direction. The alignment on the left goes on a westerly direction. The alignment in the south goes directly south, due south, and the one on the right sort of goes off on a slightly it goes slightly in western, but sort of western northwestern direction. The one on the right there, right, and you're looking at that and you're thinking, this is really interesting stuff. Why is it shaped like this? Anyway, let's go back to the aerial view of this. I felt this was, you know, when I've looked at this subject for a long time, and I just thought, right, I don't want to do this, but I felt this is working. This is work tonight, like it did last night. By the way, next week we're going to be doing the site at Must Farm, the Must Farm site, but we'll be doing that over 2 weeks. So we're doing the Must Farm next week, and we'll be doing a little bit more of this and something else the following week, and we'll go back to Must Farm. So it gives you us time to think. So,
well, it's science, isn't it?
yes, it's how their mind works. Over the centuries, this marvelous stone circle has undergone a steady transformation. And what they mean by that, stuff has been added to it. Alterations have been made. The question is, why? Do those alterations always mean the same thing? Now, again, what we mean by that is as follows. And I've used this analogy before. So you look, for example, at Winchester, and you look at the Minster at Winchester. It started off as a native Minster at Winchester. It started off as a sort of Anglo-Saxon Minster. And then in comes over in 1066, after the Battle of Hastings on the 14th of October, right? King William, he sweeps away the old religion. He sweeps away the old earls and all the rest of it. And he rebuilds the Minster at Winchester. It's a different religion. It's the new Christianity that's come over with the Normans. And then in the 1530s, 1540s, under the reign of Henry VIII, Catholicism is abolished in this country and is replaced with Protestantism. So the Minster at Winchester now becomes a Protestant church, right? And where I'm going with this is that, and things are added to it. So where I'm going with this is that 1 minute it means one thing. It's one Christian religion. The next minute it's another Christian religion, and the next minute it's another Christian religion, all in the space of 500 years, right? And when you look at these monuments, this is over thousands of years. So even with a more advanced technical world like the medieval world, right, things never remained the same. And things did not remain the same. These people's meanings and understandings of this site at Callanish, with lots of the other sites, obviously evolved. Transformations. Famous researchers like Edward Floyd in the 1600s, all the way to the likes of the researcher Alexander Thom, have taken part in the processes trying to understand the history of this site. And one quote to be made about this site is from the great archaeologist Jaquita Hawkes. Jaquita Hawkes said of this site, and I think this is quite fitting, every age gets the Stonehenge it deserves or desires. And what we mean by that is that every site has a different meaning and understanding the way people evolve and interpret the site over time. So in other words, it's like I thought of this the other day. I thought, right, oh God, you know, Valentine's Day. Do I keep having Valentine's cards off Michelle, and I've already got 8 off her, right? Do I now say to her, buy me a really expensive Valentine's card and use it every year, right? But even then, the Valentine's card, there's something new added to it, right? And this is exactly what we're saying with these sites. She might say one year, oh, I love you, I deeply love you. And the following year, something's happened, I love you. And then the following year, oh, I passionately love you, right? And it's just like that as that the meaning on that card has changed. And it's a bit like that as a microcosm to what these sites exactly mean. Not only then, but now as well. The circle there in the middle is not that large, only 12.2 meters across, but it is built of tall, scrawny stones with an even larger stone near the center at the back. Now, what we've got, they discuss that there's a small passage tomb, a midget passage tomb. Let's just not get distracted with that. But something else has been added to it, like a great cathedral, like we have burial vaults in cathedrals. Now, what we need to do, what I'm going to do, I'm going to muck around with a few images, and then we're going to go to the plan, and we're going to probably stay on the plan, right? So if we go back and we just, if I move that word plan there, let's just have a little look at a few images, right? And just try to get into this site, right? So there we go. You've got a little bit of a chamber in there, which is later. You've got these stones, and you've got a big stone in the middle. This is what we're talking about, right? So let's just get an idea. And again, that takes us closer in. And what you've got some kind of chamber there in front of this big stone, and all these stones. You've got all these stones are lined up to it, right? And again, you know, looking at that, somebody said this was we were talking about the Aurora Borealis, or whatever it's called last night, the Aurora Borealis, or whatever it's called, right? Can't say it. But you know, when you get different things in the air, right? Is that anything to do with this? It might not be. Things happen, right? And then when we got that, and again, look at the way things occur with this site, a rainbow. And look at that there, the stones creating shadows. And look at that, how the light hits these stones. And look at that, the shadows, the way they're formed. And again, we could do a whole lecture on this, but what I'd like to do is go back to the plan. And I'm very well aware of the time. So what I'm going to say, I've managed to capture a few minutes tonight. So to make up, if we could go on until 35 minutes past 9, I'd be very, very grateful. So we can get a good amount out of this tonight. So I'm going to choose which one would be best. That one there. I used that one last night. That one there. You got that. Nice. Now, so this is classed as the Stonehenge of the North. Now, there's something huge that I need to say about this as we go through this, right? And we're just going to focus on this. Just focus on this plan, right? Now, you've got three. You've got 3 rows of stones in the bottom part, and you've got an avenue from the top, and it looks like an inverted Celtic cross. But this was as again, Celtic cross, Celtic star. But the idea of the Celtic cross was thousands of years after this was built. This site is a unique design, and the challenge of its radiating lines has been met earnestly by astronomers. The Stonehenge of the North is described by a chap by the name of John Morrison around 1680. He thought the stones were simply men converted into a stone by an enchanter and set up a ring for devotion. That's really interesting that somebody in the 1680s is saying, right, the ring in the middle is for devotion. And these stones represent people who have been converted. And you think about that, that sounds nuts. But then again, you think, well, that's an explanation. A chap by the name of Martin, a few years after John Morrison, again going into the 1700s, he said it was set up in the time of the heathens. Well, heathens are people that weren't of God, which is probably correct. In 1720, it said that this site was actually constructed by sun-worshipping druids. But we've already explained this existed before any idea of druids ever hit the planet Earth. A chap by the name of John Tolland, not so long after that, wrote that this temple stands astronomically dedicated principally to the sun. So people have put things out there and they've wanted us to believe. And again, Carly online has basically said, you know, I think she says, wow. And it is wow, you know. It's something really, really that stands out. Lots of these were the first suggestions of the stones at Callanish, and I'm going to be very careful of time now. And even though this is a rough ring in the middle, it's said that these were raised by savages for atrocious rites. But this is a row of savages and a ring of savages that is got a sense of elegant engineering at the same time. These people were not savages. These were people who understood what they were doing. In 1743, William Stukeley also said that this site was to do with Druids. He made a survey of this site and understood it to have some connection with the Druids. But again, this is thousands of years before that Druidic idea, but it comes back to that. An antiquarian in 1808, Thomas Hendrick, stated that the circle was laid out to the cardinal points of north, east, south, and west to mark the rising of the sun, moon, and stars, the seasons of the year, and even the hours or divisions of the day. They had turned Callanish into the megalithic equivalent of a planetarium, right? And when you think about this, you start to think that this is being added to over a long period of time. Daniel Wilson said of this site, Callanish is a memorial of primitive astronomical knowledge, but added that it was connected with native rites of worship in prehistoric times. What do we mean by worship? What do we mean by rites? What is this primitive astronomical knowledge, or is it scientific illumination? Hardly more than a century ago, therefore, the circle was still thought of mainly as a temple of druidic sacrifice, albeit with some astronomical lines built into it. But people can't get away with the fact that there's some kind of amazing alignment with this site. Now, here is the pièce de résistance. This is why we need that last 10 minutes, guys. So nobody go. The equable mixture of ritual and astronomy might have been acceptable in the religious come scientific atmosphere of Victorian times, but by the 1900s, the astronomy became dominant with this site, if not any other. Sir Norman Locklear, director of the Solar Physics Observatory, analysed the plan of Callanish and deduced that the east row pointed to the rising of the Pleiades in the year 1330 years BC, and that the avenue to the northeast indicated the rising of the bright star Capella in the year 1720 BC. This is not an alignment to do with the sun and the moon. This is an alignment to do with two solar systems. That paints another light, another abuse on the archaeologist not able to understand this. When you think about it, oh God, I'm so frustrated that we don't have enough time. But if you look at the one on the left, which is the one on the west hand side, the one on the left, right, it's quite stunted, and the one on the right is not that long. If these were always meant to be just that long, and they are lined up with planetary systems, with the way they've been orchestrated, that makes sense on their length. It's said that Rear Admiral Boyle Somerville made his own survey of Callanish in 1909. This was the guy who was looking at this stuff in 1923. We mentioned it earlier on when we were at Stonehenge. From it, he calculated that the avenue was directed northwards to Capella in the year 1,800 years BC, which is slightly a little bit later by 80 years than our previous guy, Norman Locklear, the Solar Physics Observatory. And the Pleiades itself, he says that alignment comes in 420 years earlier than our friend Norman Locklear had said. But the fact of the matter is, whoever is right, they're saying that there's alignments to do with things other than the moon and the sun. Computer-generated technology indicated in the 1960s, amazingly enough, by Gerard Hawkins, he discovered 10 good alignments on the sun and moon at their extremes, and another the sun and moon, and another on the moon when it was at its highest at the south. The astrological alignments are indisputable, he wrote in his book Stonehenge Decoded. He was referring to this site when he was talking about Stonehenge. He's talking about the points of the latitude and the way this moved, making the alignments indicative with the low path across the sky, and all this linked. Now, 5 minutes to go, folks. I just want to try and do it. You're not going to bed yet, guys. Callanish was rapidly losing its role as a ritual temple, if it ever was. Now, when they were looking at this and they were really trying to understand this, there is lots of explanation to do with Capella and the Pleiades coming out from the 1960s onwards. So remember, the east row, which is the one on the right, and the one which heads to the north, that then the one that heads to the north goes to Capella, and the one that goes in the east goes to the Pleiades. Now the next bit is juice to the gods, right? We're just going to do this last bit now. So lots of plans have been made of this, and the sort of the degrees and all the rest of it, and how this works, and the declination and so on, right? But we don't do any of this. What we do is this next point. Listen to this, baby. You're gonna love this one. And then that our bedtime story is coming to an end. And the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus wrote that in Britain there was a spherical temple at which the moon appears to be but a little distance from the earth, a lunar event that could only have happened in a latitude of around 58 degrees north, where this site is. Diodorus added that the god visited an island every 9 years at the latitude of 58 degrees north. This was a site that saw an 18.6 year cycle of the moon. So the moon is full 18.6 times a year at this point, where it would dance continuously through the night, through from the vernal equinox until the rising of the Pleiades. Didorius Siculus was writing 2,000 bloody years ago. He understood this site. So in other words, not only do these alignments have to do with the Pleiades and Capella, they've also got a connection with the moon and the lunar latitude that the god visited this site every 9 years by the way it worked with the monument. Isn't that spectacular? That a Greek writer, a Greek historian, Didorius Siculus, is actually writing about this with 2,000 years ago. Oh my God. Carly is saying that is oh my God. And one thing what I want to do is check precisely. Sorry about this, guys. When Didorius Siculus was actually precisely about. So if we could type this into my little device here now, and I know we've only got one paragraph to do, and I will be so happy that I've managed to do this tonight. With not getting everything right. So I just want to get I want to get the Didorius Siculus thing right. Didorius Siculus, amazingly enough, he wrote 60 years BC. So he's writing about this site. 2000, just under 2,100 years ago. That's even more significant. Finally, last paragraph, folks, and we've done it. I'm happy. I'm pleased. Got it. His amazing chronicle seems to record there is a special significance was given to the period between the equinox of late March, marked by the alignment of the west row at Callanish, the west row of the Callanish, not the east row, the west row at Callanish in late March, and the rising of the Pleiades, a stellar group used worldwide by agriculturists as a calendar. If the spherical temple were not Callanish, it is a remarkable coincidence that everything aligns up with this site, as Didorius Siculus actually wrote, and the equinox and the Pleiades were mentioned by Didorius. Even the date of around 1,550 years BC would accord with modern thinking about the time when such short rows were erected as long as 500 years after the construction of the stone circle at Callanish. In other words, this site developed as a monumental alignment of things up in the sky that we can only dream of, but it actually worked. And on that note, that's a really good end, and I've managed to get to 9:35, and I'm so pleased you've got that. Carly's saying that she's going to replay the whole video back again from the States, and I have loved this because I've managed to achieve something tonight, so that's good. So on that note, we can actually ask questions, and I'm so pleased that you guys have trusted me tonight, and you are still there, and I really appreciate that. And yes, I'm gonna ask if there's any questions. I'm excited about that, aren't you, Pat?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
No, what's thought provoking? No questions
Totally
from me.
thought-provoking.
Well, yeah.
Right, okay, Anne.
I just wondered, isn't this just someone else's opinion, at that time? Like when are they saying when it was actually built? When it's the circle, the first circle? Do they know when it was built?
Well, obviously, I think that I think we can be quite precise on that. The first circle is 4,000 years ago, at least.
Well, again, I just keep thinking it's wonderful that they've made this explanation of this monument and what it's been used for. I just wondered if it's just another, like the Greeks And
or
their mythology, like the Pleiades, and them, yeah,
and Capella.
it's
Yeah.
all about projecting, isn't it? We're projecting. We're hoping that what we are projecting is the truth. It's what actually happened.
Yeah, but with this, Anne, right? It's too much of a coincidence that everything seems to line up. It's
Yeah.
it's not just a
No.
circle, right?
No.
The problem I need to ask Goff a really interesting question in a moment. So we'll finish with you, Anne, in a second. But
Okay.
usually when we look at things like this, like stone circles, and we just got a stone circle, and a stone happens to align in that direction, anyone could argue that that's. But when you've got something like this, that there's just too many things that work, and there's you know when you look at the direction, the avenue is the sort of northeast, and the sort of one on the eastern side is slightly kinked, and the one is directly aligned on the west, and the one on the going down on the south. If somebody wanted all this to be sort of cardinal points and aligned, they would have, but they deliberately had these alignments in different ways, and it speaks differently, right? So the big question I'm going to ask Goff is twofold. Goff, I think this would make a wonderful discussion for Malvin Bragg. And would Malvin Bragg's experts agree with what I've said with Callanish, Goff?
Yeah, I'm sure they would. And I think he's probably done a discussion on what you've just given. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I think I haven't got any questions, but I think it's very difficult for us to imagine these people in the world they lived in back then, because they were so much more aware of the sky and the movement of the planets and everything else. Whereas we've got Emmerdale and EastEnders. So, yeah, great, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, I've enjoyed doing that tonight, and I really appreciate you guys supporting me as well. And last one, Henry.
Oh, that was very, very interesting. I find it quite fascinating that you've got a Greek writer in 60 BC that writes about it. He also writes about Stonehenge. And, the question is, how much was the communication lines around Europe, which we consider probably was not a lot, but it actually turns out to be a lot.
And I think actually Carly says online, traveling astronomers. So when you come at the end here, this is like a Malvin Bragg thing. Malvin Bragg does this. Somebody mentioned something at the beginning. It goes back and say, actually, the traveling astronomers, isn't that what was mentioned at the beginning? And then you've just mentioned it at the end.
Yeah.
These traveling people that
the Magi.
Yeah, the lines of communication are much stronger than probably anyone gives them credit for.
Exactly.
See,
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that, Henry. Have you got anything else to say?
No, that's it. Thank you very much. Very enlightening.
Okay. I don't think we should go on any further because Pat will be complaining that these classes go on as long as Tuesday. But I'm really glad we've had another 10 minutes. Anyone want to say anything quickly before we finish now?
Good night.
No.
Good night.
No. Okay, then. Well, I'm
Good
going to say good night. Thanks for the support. And Goff, I'm going to say good night. Anne, Richard, Pat, Henry, I will see you all next week at a decent time. And thank you very much. And don't forget the monies. Bye. Night.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Night. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Night.
Night.
Yeah. Okay then. Bye. Good night. Good night.
Night, Anne and Henry. Night.
Thank you for the drive in the countryside.
Oh, Henry, that was a delight.
Right, I'll let you go.
You're the only person to actually go on a drive like that with me. I gotta tell you this, Henry. We had something happened to my Thursday morning class once, right? And I happened to be in town, and I managed to walk all the way from town here. I did an entire class walking up a hill as I'm talking to everybody. And I was just, and nobody really realized that I was walking up a hill because I had images in front of me. And I said, actually, do you know what? Over the last half an hour, I've just been walking and I've been given a lecture. and I've been showing you images as I'm walking along, and it worked perfectly fine.
There you go. Technology is quite amazing when it works.
When it works, yeah, it did work tonight. I couldn't have done without it. So, and Carly said, and yes, the Persians, and a lovely night. It has been good. Right. So anyway, no, Henry, I'll see you next week.
Yes, I'm here next week. After that, I'm away, but I can't tell you where because you're still online.
All right then, not a problem. Okay.
Bye for now.
No, Henry. No. I'll see you soon. Take care. No. And Carly, it's been great having you on tonight. It's been quite riveting. And I was going to say, Carly, what we should do is we should get you on one night, and just you and me, and we should have a talk about your research. That would be absolutely brilliant. So think about it. And next week we'll be on, and whoever else is still watching, there are other people out there. So don't forget, we'll be back next Tuesday, and yeah, keep liking, subscribing, chucking your donations on, guys. And yeah, watch back. And what else was I going to say? Next Tuesday, 7:30, Wednesday at 7:20, 7:30. I was late tonight because of stuff. And Wednesday morning at 11 o'clock. If not, I'm going to go now. So night, folks. I've got to have something to eat. I might have a cup of tea and a donut before I do anything else, and then we'll crack on. And exciting times. I'm thinking of taking a day off tomorrow. Actually, I think I need it to level my head again. Maybe spend some time with the sheep and lie on the hill on the fort and just chill. Even if I did that for 10 minutes, that would make a big difference. Anyway, night, folks. Anyway, thanks for your support. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And anyone else watching out there, I'm going to chuck the, you know what it's like, us poor people. I'm going to chuck the buy me a coffee link on there. And if anyone wants to, if anyone wants to, there we go. We can paste. And by the way, I've got my live shows. If Carly, you're ever coming over to the UK next year, we've got my live shows in Ystrad Live, Chepstow. We've got them in Abergavenny, Lampeter. We've got another location which we've still got to work out. Let me know. And obviously, if anyone wants to put a PayPal donation on over, they may do so. And there we go. If anyone wants to chuck anything over, whoever's watching, whenever. Because lots of people watch this, then there's my PayPal thing. Right, we're going to call it Guy. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Only that one person has liked it, but don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm going to go off now, Carly and everybody else, and I will see you soon. Diolch yn fawr i chi. Gwelwch chi eto. Ymar o hyd. And that's that. Night, folks. Oh, and it's is it looking a bit foggy there? I think it is. Is that better? It's looking a bit foggy on you. I don't know. Is it that clear? Anyway. Night. Look in the chat box.